Have you ever noticed that intelligence doesn't announce itself? It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't demand attention. And yet, the moment it enters a room, something changes. The air tightens. The rhythm shifts. Conversations subtly rearrange themselves. Not because you said anything wrong. Sometimes you didn't say anything at all. Arthur Schopenhauer noticed this nearly 200 years ago, and what he realized was deeply unsettling. He believed intelligence carries an invisible social cost, one that often leads to isolation, not because intelligent people choose it, but because society quietly pushes them toward it. And here's the part most people don't want to hear. According to Schopenhauer, intelligence doesn't just lead to isolation. It often causes suffering. Not dramatic suffering, not obvious suffering, but a slow psychological friction between how you see the world and how the world prefers to see itself. This is for the person who has felt oddly alone in a crowded room, for the one who senses discomfort after asking a simple but honest question, for the one who feels more alive in silence than in noise and wonders why. We are going to uncover why intelligent people so often feel isolated, why society responds defensively to them, and why Schopenhauer, along with thinkers like Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, and later Carl Jung, believed this was not a flaw of character, but a consequence of awareness. Schopenhauer wasn't speaking from theory alone. He lived this tension. Born in 1788, he watched society reward comforting illusions while quietly rejecting uncomfortable truths. As a young lecturer, he deliberately scheduled his classes at the same time as the wildly popular philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Hegel's lectures were overflowing. Schopenhauer's rooms were nearly empty. But instead of chasing applause, Schopenhauer asked a sharper question. Why do people prefer ideas that comfort them over ideas that clarify them? That question became the foundation of his philosophy, and his answer was ruthless. People don't reject intelligence because it's wrong. They reject it because it threatens how they understand themselves. Schopenhauer believed intelligence functions like a mirror, and mirrors are dangerous, not because they insult you, but because they show you what's already there. When a highly intelligent person enters a space, everyone begins measuring themselves. Not consciously, not maliciously, instinctively. Modern neuroscience now confirms what Schopenhauer observed intuitively. When people feel intellectually inferior, the brain activates the same neural circuits associated with physical pain. This is a threat response. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, lights up. Intelligence is processed not as information, but as danger. And this reaction intensifies in group settings. One-on-one, intelligence may be admired. In groups, it becomes destabilizing. Groups run on status, and intelligence disrupts hierarchy. So instead of curiosity, the group responds with subtle resistance, distance, deflection, exclusion. This is how isolation begins quietly. Think about a workplace meeting. You already see the problem. You already understand the solution, but you hesitate. Not because you're unsure, but because you know explaining it would make others uncomfortable. It would expose gaps, slow the room down, shift authority. So you stay quiet. Later, someone else offers a simpler answer, less accurate, but more comfortable. The room relaxes, and you feel the distance widen. This isn't arrogance. This is awareness. Intelligence doesn't push people away because it's loud. It pushes people away because it's quiet. It doesn't dominate. It reveals. And revelation is threatening. Now think about a group chat or a party. The jokes repeat. The opinions recycle. The conversation loops. You notice it immediately. You always do. You think in layers. They think in loops. You move vertically toward meaning, implications, and long-term consequences. They move horizontally through repetition, affirmation, and momentum. You could add something deeper, but you already know what will happen. The energy will dip. someone will deflect with humor. The topic will change, so you pull back. This is where suffering quietly enters, because intelligence doesn't just isolate, it makes you aware of the isolation. You don't feel rejected, you feel misaligned, and misalignment is exhausting. Schopenhauer noticed that intelligent people are often drained not because social interactions are hostile, but because they are cognitively expensive. The mind is processing layers beneath the surface. What's being said, what's being avoided, what's being signaled emotionally. It's like running a high-performance engine in traffic designed for bicycles. Nothing is broken. The environment is incompatible. Society misreads this withdrawal. Silence is mistaken for judgment. Distance is labeled arrogance. Depth is seen as coldness. But in reality, the intelligent person is conserving energy. Think about a family gathering. You love them. You care. But certain topics are off limits. Truths are softened. Patterns are ignored. Silence becomes safer than honesty. You sense it, so you adapt again. Slowly, you begin to feel alone even among people who love you. This is why Schopenhauer believed intelligence increases suffering, not because it creates misery, but because it removes anesthetics. Distraction stops working. Noise stops satisfying. Surface-level interaction feels hollow. And here comes the question people always ask. Isn't isolation unhealthy? Aren't humans social creatures? Schopenhauer's answer was precise. Humans are social, but not all social interaction is nourishing. There is a difference between connection and stimulation. Most people fear being alone with their thoughts. Intelligent people fear losing them. Solitude is not the absence of people. It is the absence of interference. Interference is what prevents most people from ever hearing themselves think. Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and later Jung all reached the same conclusion from different angles. The more aware you become, the harder it is to live unconsciously. This awareness creates distance at first, but distance is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of clarity. At some point, intelligent people begin to notice a painful pattern. The more honest they are, the more distant others become. Not hostile, not cruel, just gone. Arthur Schopenhauer believed this is where intelligence starts to feel like suffering, because intelligence doesn't just show you more, it forces you to feel more. You don't just notice shallow conversations. You notice the effort it takes to stay in them. You don't just sense avoidance. You understand why it's happening. Awareness without agency is exhausting, and this is why many intelligent people slowly withdraw. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly. They stop explaining. They stop correcting. They stop offering depth where it isn't wanted. Over time, isolation settles in. But Schopenhauer made a critical distinction that most people miss. Isolation is not always imposed. Sometimes it is chosen, and sometimes it is protective. This is where critics push back. They say humans are social creatures. They say isolation leads to depression. They say withdrawal is unhealthy. Schopenhauer did not deny the social nature of humans. He questioned the quality of modern social life. Much of what we call socializing is distraction rather than connection, noise instead of reflection, stimulation instead of meaning. For the intelligent mind, this becomes unbearable, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. It's like discovering how a magic trick works. You don't hate the magician, but the illusion is gone forever. This is why intelligent people often feel more alive in silence than in conversation. Think about the last time you felt genuinely clear, not entertained, not stimulated, clear. That clarity almost never arrives in a crowded room. It arrives in quiet moments where thought can finish itself. Schopenhauer believes solitude allows the mind to recover from the constant threat response triggered by social environments. In groups, intelligence is perceived as a threat because it destabilizes status. People respond not with curiosity, but with avoidance. This is why intelligent people are often welcomed in private conversation but sidelined in groups. Over time, the intelligent person learns a difficult lesson. Depth has a social cost. Every time you bring clarity into a space that survives on comfort, you pay for it. So the mind adapts. It begins scanning environments, quietly asking whether depth is safe here. This is where the difference becomes unmistakable. You think in layers: meaning, structure, implications, long-term outcomes. They think in loops: familiar stories, emotional reinforcement, repetition. Neither approach is evil, but they are incompatible. This incompatibility shows up clearly in decision-making. When faced with a problem, you want to understand the root cause. They want a quick resolution. You slow down to think. They rush to act. You question assumptions. They defend them. Eventually you disengage, not because you don't care, but because you see where it leads. This is why intelligent people often feel invisible, not ignored, but unused. Now think again about a group chat. A serious topic comes up. Opinions fly. Certainty dominates. You pause because you see nuance on all sides. You know that saying this will not be rewarded. It will slow things down. It won't get agreement. So you type, then delete. Repeated self-silencing builds suffering. Not because you are unheard, but because you choose silence to protect yourself. Schopenhauer believed this internal censorship is one of the heaviest burdens of intelligence. You carry thoughts that don't have a home. Without a home, thoughts become weight. This is where solitude begins to change meaning. At first it feels like loss. Then it feels like relief. Then it becomes clarity. In solitude, you don't need to compress your thinking. You can follow an idea to its end. You can sit with discomfort without escaping it. You can think without editing yourself. This is not antisocial behavior. It is cognitive hygiene. Schopenhauer did not believe intelligent people should disappear completely. He believed they must learn when to engage and when to withdraw. Engage when curiosity is present, when questions are welcomed, when silence does not feel threatening. Withdraw when conversation loops endlessly, when humor is used to deflect truth, when certainty becomes aggressive. You don't need to announce withdrawal. You don't need to explain it. You simply redirect your energy. One subtle test reveals everything. Share a small piece of depth, not your deepest insight. If it is met with curiosity, continue. If it is met with dismissal or jokes, stop. Depth reveals its own audience. This is how intelligent people protect themselves without disappearing. They don't isolate from humanity. They isolate from noise. And once they stop measuring themselves by popularity, approval, and visibility, suffering begins to loosen. They stop asking why they don't fit in. They start asking where their depth belongs. This is where intelligence stops feeling like a curse and starts functioning like orientation. You don't need to change who you are, only where you stand. There comes a quiet moment when an intelligent person stops resisting their own nature, not because they have given up, but because they have finally understood the pattern. Arthur Schopenhauer believed this moment marked the transition from suffering to clarity. Before this realization, intelligent people often blame themselves. They assume something is wrong with them. They adjust their tone, soften their language, and compress their thoughts. They learn to stay agreeable. But the discomfort never disappears because the discomfort was never caused by who they are. It was caused by where they were standing. Trying to live deeply in shallow spaces is like trying to breathe thin air. You don't struggle because you are weak. You struggle because the environment is not built for you. Schopenhauer believed this misplacement is the hidden source of much intellectual suffering. Intelligence increases awareness, and awareness removes illusions. You begin to see how much of social life is driven by habit rather than meaning. How many conversations are rituals rather than exchanges? How often people speak to fill silence rather than to say something true? This realization does not make you superior. It makes you separate. And separation, at first, feels like loss. This is why Schopenhauer described intelligence as a double-edged sword. It grants clarity, but it strips away comfort. Friedrich Nietzsche echoed this when he wrote that the higher a person climbs, the colder the air becomes. Soren Kierkegaard described the same experience as the loneliness of inwardness. Carl Jung later framed it psychologically, noting that individuation inevitably separates the individual from the collective. Different thinkers, same conclusion. Depth creates distance. Not because the world is cruel, but because it is optimized for function, not reflection. This is where isolation must be understood properly. Isolation becomes harmful when it is imposed and unwanted. Solitude, when chosen, serves a different purpose. Schopenhauer believed solitude is where intelligent people stop bleeding energy. Away from constant comparison, performance, and threat response, the mind recalibrates. Thoughts lengthen. Emotions settle. Values clarify. This is why so many great thinkers lived quietly. Isaac Newton withdrew for years and reshaped physics. Immanuel Kant followed the same solitary routine daily and built an entire moral framework. Franz Kafka wrote in isolation because social life fragmented his inner world. These were not antisocial people. They were protective of depth. Solitude gives the intelligent person continuity of thought. Without interruption, ideas mature. Without noise, insight connects. Without constant validation seeking, the self stabilizes. This is where suffering begins to dissolve. Not because life becomes easy, but because it becomes coherent. You stop chasing resonance where it does not exist. You stop explaining yourself to people who are not listening. You stop mistaking stimulation for connection. In its place, something stronger appears. Self-trust. You trust your instincts about people. You trust your need for space. You trust your rhythm. You no longer feel guilty for declining invitations that drain you. You stop asking why you do not fit in and start asking where your depth belongs. This does not mean rejecting society. It means engaging deliberately. You learn to recognize signals of depth. People who ask genuine questions. People who do not rush silence. People who can sit with uncertainty. You also learn to recognize warning signs. Endless repetition. Deflection through humor. Aggressive certainty. This discernment is not arrogance. It is self-preservation. Schopenhauer believed the task of the intelligent person is not to isolate forever, but to re-enter the world consciously. Not to belong everywhere, but to belong meaningfully. This is where intelligence becomes quiet power. You speak less, but with precision. You connect less, but with depth. You stop trying to be relatable and become authentic. Authenticity carries a different kind of gravity. People sense it. They may not always like it, but they respect it. And the right ones recognize themselves in it. This is the paradox Schopenhauer understood. The more comfortable you become with solitude, the less lonely you feel. The less you depend on validation, the more grounded your connections become. You no longer chase people. You allow alignment. If you have ever felt strange for preferring silence, if you have ever felt exhausted by conversations others seem to enjoy, if you have ever wondered whether intelligence is more burden than gift, Schopenhauer's answer is clear. Intelligence does cause suffering at first, because it removes illusions faster than the world can replace them. But that suffering is transitional. On the other side of it is clarity, and clarity brings freedom. You do not need to change who you are. Only where you stand. Only how you engage. Only what you expect. You were never meant to blend into noise. You were meant to move through it consciously. And that difference, that quiet distance, that depth is not society's loss. It is your orientation. If this helped you feel understood rather than entertained, this channel is for you. Here we explore ideas for people who think in layers, not loops, who value clarity over comfort and depth over noise. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper. You do not need to fit in here. You already belong.